Hello, hello. Bromula One here. I'm Caleb,
And I'm Ryan.
and Steven is here in spirit. He can't make it to the recording today. I believe he's
Miss you,
off.
buddy.
Yeah, we miss him. I'm sure he'd love to be here to just talk about Max the entire episode. No, I'm just kidding.
He's not that much of a Max fanboy, but he
No,
does
he's
like
not.
Max.
Yeah, yeah. We will talk about Max for you, Steven. You don't have to worry. But it's post Monza, post Italian GP, September 3rd. We'll probably be releasing this episode September 4th. So for all you listeners, it's we'll be dropping it tomorrow. But what a good weekend. What'd you think about that, Ryan?
Man, I love this track. It's such a contrast to the last race out in Zandvoort. High speed, low drag, not a lot of turns, just three chicanes essentially throughout the whole thing. The Tifosi, the Ferrari fans are out in force, and it was really nice to see Ferrari showing strong pace early in the practice sessions, and then I'm sure we'll move on and talk about qualifying. But overall, I thought it was a very exciting weekend.
Yeah, it was a fantastic weekend. What's your favorite part of the track? Do you have a favorite part?
Ooh, I like they renamed it, but it's the Parabolica, the last um, corner coming into the main straight. I think it's fascinating to watch the speed that these drivers carry through there. I've
Mhm.
raced a little bit of Gran Turismo back in the day, and that corner is tricky, man. Trying to keep
Is it?
any car on there, uh, it's tough.
It's almost like a slingshot.
Yeah, it really is. And you could see how the Red Bulls are taking different lines compared to the Ferraris through there, and how that would set them up on that main straight
Yeah, that
into
was
turn
really
one.
interesting. Yeah, the battle with Max and Sainz. But yeah, I mean, just quickly, that was fun seeing in free practice, seeing Ferrari finally showing some dominance. I think the last race that they looked good in was Austria. That was a long time ago, where they showed some good race pace. And that track is pretty similar in terms of just, it's mostly just straights with a few corners and stuff like that. But um, qualifying, wow. I honestly
Yes.
thought that the Red Bull was gonna finish first after, especially after Max came over the line after Charles. I was like, oh no, here we go. But wow, Carlos was hooked up all weekend, wasn't he?
He was ahead of Charles through the practice sessions, right? And it was so close. Those top three drivers were less than a tenth of
Yeah,
a
they
second
were.
apart, I think it was.
Hmm.
That was wild. That was so close. And good for Carlos. Everybody praises Charles as being the qualifying king, and there's nobody faster over one lap. But uh, Carlos did very well.
Yeah,
And of course, Ferrari fans everywhere were super glad to see a Ferrari on the front row,
yeah.
in P1.
It's about time, right? It seems like they just have built their car. They're like, you know what? This season, we're not going to get second. We're not even going to try for first. But hey, we should try hard for Monza.
It's like you mentioned Austria. There are a few tracks on the calendar there that are power circuits
Hmm.
where the Ferrari engine is strong, and Ferrari, like you said, I think last episode, Caleb, that Ferrari has consistently had a very high top speed, and that suited them well this weekend.
Yeah, yeah, that was really, and it just it it almost puts. I mean, we're putting Ferrari on this pedestal for Monza, but it puts Red Bull even higher. They're winning the fast circuits. They're winning the slow circuits. They're winning the medium speed circuits. It's disgusting how consistently good their car is and how it's better than like Ferrari, who is literally just built for straight line speed and they really don't have much on the corners and stuff like that, or a Williams, and they just are taking it to them. I have no words for how well this car has been manufactured, engineered, upgraded this
Yeah,
season.
well, I think we should start calling it the not the Red Bull, but the Red Bulldozer. Anything that's in front of it just needs to move out of the way. There's nothing stopping it. And
That's
as we
true.
saw, 10 victories in a row from Max Verstappen. We witnessed history today.
Hmm.
We've never seen anybody in the history of Formula One win 10 races in a row. And so I tip my hat to Max. I'm not as upset as I thought I would be. I'm actually happy for him, and I just think it's a pretty special thing for us to witness as fans.
And it's crazy. It takes a little bit of luck to get 10 in a row as well. As we saw at the very end of the Monza GP, Max started having a mechanical issue, and we don't know what it was yet, but he was losing 3 seconds a lap to the cars behind him. And Checo
And
actually finished just like 6 seconds behind. And I heard someone say, or I read a post saying, if Yuki hadn't retired, there would have been an extra lap that they would have ran. And I wonder if that would have
hmm,
influenced things.
possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious what happened. I didn't realize he was losing 3 seconds a lap. I was too focused on the Charles and Carlos battle to even notice the timesheets. I'm like, Max is, he's a he's a few corners up ahead. Nobody's catching him, but that was an exciting battle towards
That
the end of the
was
race there.
that was absolutely awesome. Yeah. Should we discuss our predictions and see how they did real quick, and then hop into
Yeah,
just our favorite parts of the GP?
yeah. Maybe we should give just a general overview of what happened in the race, just chronologically, and then we can talk about moments. But you and I, Caleb, are flops, and we're gonna rename these what the weekend wankers.
Weekend Wankers. Yeah, we got to have an original little name for it, right?
Right, right. Even though we didn't coin the term, but we're just piggybacking off of Gunther Steiner's fame from Drive to Survive. So, so you and I both predicted. You first had predicted that Mercedes was gonna flop this weekend, and how do you think they did overall?
I don't think they flopped at all, considering the strengths of what I thought their car was strong in. And honestly, during free practice, I was like, yeah, they're gonna flop. But then
Yeah.
qualifying happened, and George just threw down some miracle lap. I was like, what the heck was that? I think his top speed was like 10, maybe 12 kilometers slower than
Ooh.
the other cars that qualified above him, and
Wow.
even some of the cars behind him. I was like, how did he do this? How did he throw down this lap? And it seemed
Yeah.
like Hamilton maybe had a little bit of a different setup. I think he mentioned something like that in free practice. They went a little bit of the wrong direction, but he had a great race and a great recovery in his race, even with the incident with Oscar, which was a total bummer for Oscar. I'm really sad. He was my P3. I was
Yeah.
totally wrong in that, but Mercedes smashed. They did not flop at all. I think they over exceeded for what I was expecting. I was expecting maybe like an eighth and a ninth or a seventh and an eighth, but
Mhm.
what did they finish? Was it fifth and sixth?
Fifth and sixth. Yeah, it was a 1-2 Red Bull, a 3-4 Ferrari, and 5-6 Mercedes. And I think Mercedes showed that they have the third fastest car. At least this weekend they did. I was shocked, like you.
Hmm.
I was expecting maybe fighting for a couple points at the end. But I think nobody else really could answer the Mercedes. The McLarens couldn't.
Mm-mm.
He passed the Williams with pretty relative ease towards the end there, and other cars were having trouble passing the Williams.
The
And then
entire
Fernando
race.
Alonso and Aston, they just poor guys.
Yeah,
Stroll, we didn't see him once, I don't think, throughout the whole race. And
for the
we
whole
saw
weekend.
Fernando at the end as he
Yeah.
was catching the McLarens and Albon and the Williams. But pretty sad weekend for Aston. We
Hmm.
both kind of failed on our flop prediction, didn't we? But
Yeah,
we
that
vowed
was
to do
bad.
better next time.
Yeah. Do you remember who Steven had as his flop?
I was trying to remember,
I don't remember.
and who was it? Was
I
he saying
didn't.
Ferrari? Ferrari was his flop,
Oh, because of the hype. That's right. I remember it
right?
was a hype based flop prediction. So
Yeah, and I would say Ferrari are just pretty pleased with what they managed to do. I mean, I thought they could have held on to a second place, given how poorly Perez was trying to overtake people.
yeah, that was. I saw Perez struggling with George Russell, and I'm like, there's no way he's getting past these Ferraris.
Right.
But he did, so good for him.
Yeah, it
There
only
was a lot
took
of
him,
complaining on his end with the radios and stuff.
dude. Yeah, so let's jump into that and talk about some of the overtakes. Oh, do you want to? We should cover our pole
Top threes
position
real quick.
or who do you have for pole position? I had Charles.
I had Charles as well.
Yeah, and Steven nailed it, knocked it out of the park. He predicted signs. Look at that.
Steven, pat yourself on the back when you listen to this episode. Good job, man.
Attaboy, brother. And for your podium, who did you have? I know you had Max first, as did I.
I had Max, then I had Charles, and then I had Oscar. And
Ah, that's
so
right.
semi close. I kind of missed a lot with the McLaren. I think you had a McLaren third as well.
Yep, I had Charles P2 and Lando P3, and the McLarens were nowhere near. podium contention today.
Mm-mm. Yeah. So cool. I think yeah, we did all right. I
Not
think
too
Saban
bad.
did better than we did, but
We'll work on our weekend wankers.
yeah, yeah, we're now at 50% hit rate for our weekend wankers. So,
Oof.
well, let's talk about the race, man. Oh my word.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
lap one for formation lap, Yuki retires.
right.
The race was delayed another like 25 minutes or something.
Yeah, that was unusual to have somebody pull off in the formation lap, and then race control seemed to be kind of silent. Didn't really take action very quickly. They like, oh, okay, let's do another formation lap. Yuki's car was still there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the delay was the right call, but I wish they would have been a little bit more on top of their game.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting because when the race started, they just left a blank space for Yuki. Like Liam didn't move up to 11th where Yuki was. Is that
Right.
I wasn't aware. I'm, as a newer fan, I'm learning pretty much every race that I watch, and that was interesting
Yeah.
to see.
That's how it's supposed to be. I think on that first formation lap when Yuki pulled over, Liam accidentally pulled into Yuki's spot. So at least I couldn't see a gap where Yuki's car was. So it was good that they went around again. Otherwise, if they had started, Liam would have been penalized for that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that would have been unfortunate. Wow. Well, the race
Rookie
start
mistake. So lights
signs.
out.
What'd you say?
So lights out, race start.
Yeah, lights out, race start. My word. I was really nervous for a race start Max pass because
Hmm.
I really thought that there would be some good racing between Max and Sainz, and we were lucky enough not to have that. It seemed like even Charles got close to he was right behind Carlos, but then, Max kind of had the outside. Yeah, it was a little bit ahead of him, but there was some good racing those first 15 laps. Carlos held him behind.
Yeah, I didn't think it would last that long. To be honest, I thought Max was gonna fire that up in 5, 7 laps and nail him.
Hmm.
But those top three, Carlos, Max, and Charles, they were all hanging with each other, all pretty much within DRS of each other. At some points, they were less than a second across the three of them. So it was nice to see that battle up there. Max had a couple looks into turn one, couldn't quite get the move done. He pulled out. He was alongside on the left side of signs, made that
Hmm.
same move or tried to that he did on Lewis a few years
Yes,
back, if
they
you
mentioned
recall.
that.
We mentioned those sausage curbs, and Max wisely backed out and did not hit those sausage curbs, and then complained on the radio that Carlos was being a little naughty.
Yeah. And I
It looked
think
clean
that,
to me, but
yeah, it looked pretty clean to me. I think Carlos had the racing line, but that was so fun. I think Carlos is a good driver, and before the race, he wasn't really in my top five, and I don't think he still is in my top five. But I earned so much respect for Carlos as a driver from those first 15 laps. He is so confident, calm, collected in the way that he drives, and being able, I think it's pretty easy to predict where people are going to go and place their car to overtake in Monza.
mhm.
But he was just in the right spot every single time.
Oh, he was defending excellently, and
Hmm.
really he didn't do anything wrong up until lap 15, had
The
a slight
lockup.
lockup, and that's all it took for Max. Max was biding his time. He knew he had a fast car. He knew it wasn't worth the unnecessary risk to uh, set that record of winning 10 in a row. He just knew that I'll get him eventually and pressure him into a mistake, and that's all it took was one slight error on Sainz's part. But
Hmm.
otherwise, it was a phenomenal defense up to that point. And then throughout the rest of the race, I thought Carlos was just fantastic.
Yeah, he was brilliant. If he wouldn't have gotten that third spot in the podium, I would have been so frustrated because he did all of the heavy lifting for Ferrari.
Yeah.
He held back Verstappen, he held back Perez. And then if Charles were to just zoom up there and get that podium, which is fair, it's racing, I would have been a little just upset for Carlos though. It's his first podium of the season. He worked so hard. He outqualified his teammate, he outqualified Max. He deserved that. What a race for him. I think he's we I don't want to get too far ahead, but that man is my what do we call it? Our my bro moment of the week. His whole race, his whole weekend is my bro moment.
Did he get driver of the day? I saw he was up there um,
Yeah, I can't remember who got it.
as voted by the fans, but I didn't see the final result.
Hmm.
Although, dude, that those last few laps against him and Charles at the end, I was like, oh, let's go, Charles. Like, I wanted to see that fight. Charles
Hmm.
brought it. There were lockups left and right. There was even some contact into the second chicane.
Yes.
Lucky that neither of them came together, got a flat. So very, very exciting. Like good for Ferrari too for letting their boys race it out. And they both wanted to be on the podium. They're both Ferrari drivers at Monza. Good for Ferrari for letting him duke it out. And I think you're right. The hero of the weekend, Carlos, came out on top in the
Hmm.
end. So happy for him.
Yeah. And I think Carlos, I think Ferrari did a really good job this weekend with the strategy. Even after he got passed by Max, Carlos was right up, or Charles was right up Carlos's rear, and they pitted Carlos pretty early just to prevent that fight. But I think maybe in races past they may have just let Charles through. And Sainz has been on the receiving end of some unfortunate team strategy calls, and I was happy just to see that they were allowed to race, especially at the very end. That was so fun, especially that lockup very last lap with Charles trying to pass signs, and I think the radio right before said, "Hey, no risk. Let's not let's not bin both cars."
It was contradictory. He said no risk, you're free to race or something like that. No risk.
Yeah.
Maybe we just misunderstood as fans, but to
Hmm.
me it meant like, hey Charles, like let's just get it home. Because you hear Carlos on the radio complaining, he's like, hey guys, let's just get this home.
Yeah.
Like, don't let him attack me.
There was some risky racing there. They
Yeah.
were elbows out, man. That was
Charles
fun.
claims he was, they're both on the limit, but he was still in control. Very much on the edge of the limit for sure.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. I'm surprised that the Ferrari held its pace so well throughout the race. That was a little shocking to me. I was worried that they were just set up for qualifying and then they were going to drop back pretty easily, but I was happy to see that they had some pace in them.
I hate to play devil's advocate here, but once Max got past Carlos on last lap 15, dude was putting a second a lap gap back to the Ferraris.
Yeah, you got a point.
Dude, a second a lap. By lap 20, he was up like 4 or 5 seconds. And then he just put it on cruise control and just managed his tires to the end. So I don't think we saw the full pace of that Red Bull, at least not the bulldozer that Max is driving. But
Hmm.
let's talk about Checo, man.
Goodness.
He was stuck behind Russell and
Hmm.
had multiple attempts. It looked like he was doing the same sort of maneuver into turn one,
Every
and he was also
single.
braking like way later than Russell. Like Russell was out braking him every time. I'm like, dude, like you gotta.
Yeah.
He kept trying
Do
the same
something.
thing. It
Learn.
wasn't working,
Yeah.
and man, that was a little disappointing to see, given Max's pace over the Ferraris up front. Uh,
Hmm.
I didn't even think that Checo was going to get a podium, to be honest. Seeing
Hmm.
that initial pace that he was putting out,
Yeah, it was
but
fun to see him struggle with Russell. I was like, oh yeah, we got a double podium by Ferrari coming, loading, it's incoming.
mhm,
But he was able to he had a pretty decent pass on Russell. It took him like 6 laps of making the same move to finally
right,
do it. Which reminds me of his race back in Austria, actually, when he was going to pass Sainz specifically. It took him several laps, and into turn three of Austria, he would do the same exact move, and Carlos would just do the same exact defend.
mhm,
And I don't know. I think Checo's kind of showing some of his colors, his lack of creativity, maybe, and overtaking. They call him the Minister of Defense.
mm,
Maybe he's not the Minister of Offense.
you're right,
But I don't know, that was seeing that and seeing how Max was able to handle that situation versus how Checo handled it, I think showed the difference in driver skill level a little bit. It was more because they were presented with the exact same situations,
right,
and how Max handled it versus how Checo handled it, I think put a little bit of a spotlight on the skill gap between the two drivers. I think he's doing all right. I think he's doing just enough to keep his seat, and I think he'll continue to do that for the rest of the season. Which I don't ever want to like wish anyone not well, but I do want to see Max pushed to the limit, and I think the only car that can do that is the other seat in Red Bull. And so I'm kind
mhm.
of wanting Red Bull to replace Checo's seat, but that's okay. It was fun seeing. I mean, Max is one of the best drivers. He's got one of the best. He's got incredible racecraft, and to see some of it during today's Grand Prix was pretty fun. I just wish I could see it more often.
Yeah, I think we're all with you on that, Caleb. And you've been pretty vocal about getting Checo out of that seat these last couple
I
episodes.
know. I've been too vocal. I feel bad. I mean, Checo's a great driver. You Checo fans, I respect him, but
Uh, all
you
these
can't be blind.
all these dudes are amazing drivers, but I think we saw today. You mentioned maybe it's a little bit of deficit in skill with Perez failing to make these passes. I also wonder, just personality wise, I would not put Checo among the top 10 most aggressive drivers on the grid. I probably bottom five, you know,
Yeah, you got a
in
good
terms
point.
of just aggression and grunt and getting after it. Uh, he's not on Max's level in that capacity for
Mm-mm.
sure. Skill wise, I would also say, yeah, nobody's really on Max's level right now.
Hmm. Yeah, that's
But
interesting that you say that. He doesn't have the typical F1 personality that you see amongst the characteristics and traits that you see amongst the drivers. When they see a gap, they take it. It seems like he's almost like, "Hey, I have a faster car, just let me pass." And it's like,
mhm.
"No, man, it's a race. Come on."
You like how he was on the radio? We can't race like this. He's not giving me any space. I'm like, dude, that all looked pretty clean,
That was
but I'm not in the
super clean.
cockpit. Of course, I'm not driving the thing, but I've seen way more egregious uh, instances that weren't penalized. So uh,
Yeah.
I thought it was all pretty clean and fair racing overall.
Yeah.
So in the end, he does end up P2, passes both the Ferraris, and then we're left with that sweet Ferrari squabble at the end.
Hmm.
Um, how about a little bit further down? So both Mercedes actually got penalties, right?
George got a penalty too?
Yeah, dude, he passed Ocon um,
That's right. That's right.
into turn one, and he
That's right.
just skipped the chicane. He's like, nah, and then he just
He's
kept
like,
going.
yeah, he knew that he was much faster than those cars, and he was like, I don't even care. Give me the penalty. I'm just going to clear him. I think he
Yeah,
kind
maybe
of
so.
knew that was going to happen.
Maybe, yeah. So, so that was George's. He's like, it's gonna slow me down more if I slow down, give him the place back. I'll just take the 5 second.
Hmm.
Um,
Which ended
and
up helping
then
him.
yeah, he was so far ahead. There was no threat really of
He had
getting
a
that five
lonely
second
race. He
penalty.
had a lonely race.
He did, he did.
But
Um,
yeah, Hamilton, we had, what was that incident lap? Do you know what lap that occurred with
oh,
Piastri?
it must have been lap
In the
30,
30s or
40,
40s.
somewhere in there,
Hmm.
towards the latter stage of the race, and they had a good fight. He and Oscar into turn one. They had a couple close moments. Oscar on that Curva Grande, which is the one that leads into the second chicane.
Hmm.
Oscar kind of squeezed Lewis a little bit on the outside, so maybe Lewis was coming back a little hard to like
Hey.
assert his dominance over the
Hmm.
rookie, and then contact.
Hmm.
And when it was unfolding in the race, we had more of an overhead view sort of thing, and I thought, oh man, I it looked to me like Oscar had hit him, but then on the replay, it was clearly Lewis just kind of going a little wide.
Hmm.
They were
I think
both lucky, I think, to get away with minimal damage.
I was thinking maybe a double DNF between the two of
Yeah.
them, especially considering I thought there was maybe some side pod damage or something with where they made contact. But I was with you initially as well when I first saw the clip. I was like, oh no, it was under review for a penalty. I'm like, it's going to be Oscar who gets the penalty. I think a, a part of me assumed that because he's the rookie as well, and
Yeah, maybe
rookies
guilty
just,
here too.
yeah, just tend to make mistakes.
Oh,
But
Lewis doesn't make mistakes, you know.
yeah, yeah. He's usually a pretty clean driver. I feel like he does a pretty decent job of keeping his craft clean. But it was just unfortunate. It was almost like Oscar was, they were just driving along. Mercedes was passing him around the outside. And then he was like, oh shoot, like I can't turn right anymore. I'm against the wall. And Lewis is right next to me. He's like, I'm just going to start slowing down to back out. But it was too late because Lewis had already done that outside turn. I think
Hmm.
Lewis was almost expecting him to maybe mimic his speed and just follow along the outside or just cut through the corner and then give the position to Lewis. And so it seemed a little bit unfortunate. And Lewis did apologize post race. The second he got out of his car, he walked back to Oscar. And I'm sure, Lewis is a little more happy to apologize, more willing to apologize, considering his race result and how the penalty didn't affect him at all. But I'm
Hmm.
sure he would have done it anyway. He's a very classy driver, in my opinion. Unless it comes to Max, I think they have some beef there. But in general,
Yeah.
Lewis does a good job of being like almost like the grandfather of the paddock next to Fernando Alonso. He puts his arm around people's shoulders and stuff like that. But that was a little unfortunate for Oscar though. He was driving a good race, and it was just hard to see him drop out of the points. I have a question, Ryan.
Hmm.
If you're out of the top 10 and you get fastest lap, does it still count as your point?
You don't get a point if you're out of the top 10 places, but you steal the opportunity from Max or whomever in
So
the top
nobody would
10.
get that. Nobody gets it then.
Right. No point for
Interesting. Okay,
anybody.
so he did steal it, right? He did.
He did.
Nobody ended up getting it. Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure
Not
about that, so thanks for telling me. Yeah.
not that it helps much. Max
Yeah.
still had a killer weekend and just pulled out the gap even further. And Lewis came out of the break saying, "Oh, I'm going for P2, Checo," and that gap now has ballooned because Checo's had back-to-back P2s and Lewis has not made it on the podium. So
Yeah, he still has yet
it's
to catch Fernando. So
yeah, it's close with Fernando, but yeah, not close enough.
this next race is Singapore, so I think that'll be interesting. I think that will be Aston Martin's probably best race for the rest of the year. Like that suits their car, and so that'll be interesting to see. But yeah, we haven't even discussed. I think we were just touched on it, and we were about to discuss, but Albon and the
Whoop, whoop.
Williams McLaren battle that went on.
Yeah,
Um, that was pretty fun to watch. It was pretty much the entire race that at least Lando was behind Albon. Oscar was, and then he kind of pitted, and then he got knocked back further. But it was Albon did a great job defending. That Williams straight line speed was wonderful, and the McLaren just was so draggy it couldn't pass the Williams.
you
Lewis
know
flew
what?
by.
One of them got by Alex in the beginning laps of the races or of the race, and then Albon had a great pass back onto the McLaren and kept him
Hmm.
behind him for the rest of the race. It was, like you said, very tight. Uh, Piastri did a great job all weekend. I think he did great to match his teammate, even beat his teammate in qualifying. And
Hmm.
like you said, it's a shame that Oscar had that damage, and then subsequently had a 5 second penalty for I think some contact. Or no, he cut the chicane into turn one and just he pulled a George Russell. He's like he saw that work and he's like, all
He's
right, I'll
like, I'm
give that
out
a
of
go.
here.
But yeah, Albon did great, man. Great points for him. It's cool to see it after the race how him and Lando and Charles are all buddy buddy hanging out and just having a good time, and they all get along outside of the track, which is great to see.
Hmm.
So it's nice to see them encouraging each other and patting each other on the back.
Yeah, especially with Albon and the way his career has been. I think his friends Charles and Lando were able to be like, "Hey, man, celebrate with him. Just be happy for him," you know.
Yeah,
And I don't think we'll be able to see. I don't think the Williams will be doing a whole lot of fighting where they were today for the rest of the year. This was kind of their shot, their track, and but it was. I mean, I'm sure we'll see some more points finishes, but it was fun to see them up fighting with the McLarens, the Mercedes, and putting a, kind of sticking it to him like, hey, I'm a good driver, put some respect on my name. I think he's the most eligible bachelor. Most teams are giving him an eye. He's said no to Red Bull already, hasn't he? Yeah, they offered him, right, and he said
yeah. I think
no.
he said no thanks, quote unquote.
Yeah, he's good for him. He's grown some cojones, which I think he kind of lacked at the beginning of his career. So I think he's really really growing into himself, and I think he could be around for another decade or so in Formula One with the way he's driving.
Yeah, I would
But
agree with that.
his teammate might not be around for another
Oh
decade, might not be
man,
around for another season.
he went bowling for Botas. Did you see that?
I didn't see the incident, but I saw the penalty.
Yeah, Logan got 2 points on his license, which is not good. Lewis
Oh,
also got 2 points for his collision with Oscar.
oh, really?
Um,
Interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
penalty points. And once you get a certain number of penalty points, you get a race ban or something like that.
Yeah, it's like 12 or something, and they fall off after a certain amount of time, right?
Right. So, as a rookie to get your first penalty points late in the season like this, it's going to happen. That's no sweat. But
Hmm.
the way that he went into that second chicane, he basically barreled into the side pod of Botas, and that's what got him
Shoot.
I think a 5 second penalty, maybe even a 10 second. Don't quote me on that.
Five
But
seconds.
he finished, I think, P11 because Lawson got got a penalty as
He
well.
finished
Penalties all over the place.
P12 because Oscar jumped him at the very end, and then Valtteri was P10. Although
Yeah,
Oscar may have, with the penalty, fallen behind again, so I'm not sure. I think it was
yeah,
P11. Oscar had P11 though. But
somewhere in there. But hey, Bottas got a point, man, for Alfa
wow,
Romeo at
yeah,
their well, they're an Italian-ish team, I guess. They had their livery looked so sick this
that
weekend,
was
dude.
sweet. That was the
I
best part of their
love that.
weekend.
Yeah,
Although Valtteri scoring points is huge.
it is.
That's huge for them. I was not
Yeah.
expecting I the fact that Logan Sargent didn't get that final point. I am sad to say I think he's really lost his chance unless he
Okay, and
has some
I,
go ahead.
yeah, sorry, finish.
Unless he has some miracle performances, which I don't think the car will. I think the car is going to hold them back for the rest of the year. So I think he's kind of he was racing for his life, for his seat, not for his life, his seat, his life in Formula One.
Whoa now. Whoa now.
It's not that extreme, although some of the drivers may seem like it's that extreme.
All right,
And
so
yeah, go
slight
ahead.
correction on the finishing places.
Hmm.
So Bottas 10th, P11 was Lawson,
Oh,
Piastri P12, Sargent was P13.
oh my
So
goodness.
Lawson 1 point or one position away from a point scoring position on his second race in Formula One. Well done, Liam. Like, honestly, that was a fantastic result for him. So super
Hmm.
stoked for
Man, that's
Liam.
awesome for him. That was incredible. It's a bummer not being able to compare him next to Yuki and see how Yuki would have done in the race. And so it's kind of it's not an outlier because he finished extremely well and he beat a McLaren and he beat Logan off of merit. That was his own skill beating a Williams.
Yeah, yeah.
I think this bodes well for his future in Formula One.
I hope so. What a great opportunity. He's seized it and he's done very well with it. So looking forward to what he can. We'll see if he's racing in Singapore in
Hmm.
2 weeks. We'll see how Danny Rick does with his recovery. But I think you're right. Singapore is going to be interesting. It's a very different track from Monza, one of the most, if not the most, physically grueling tracks on the circuit or on the calendar.
I
Super
think
hot,
every
super
driver,
humid.
yeah,
Yeah.
every driver slightly doesn't look forward to it just because of how
Right.
difficult it is.
Right.
It's kind of a boring track in the sense there's not a lot of opportunities to change your position. Qualifying pretty much sets your fate in stone. So yeah, that'll be interesting. I kind of hope that we get to see one more race out of Liam on a completely different track just to
Hmm.
see his potential. But if not, I'm happy to see Daniel Ricciardo come back. It's a little bit of a bummer that he'll be coming back on such a difficult race. I'm sure he'll be like, "Whoa, I'm not ready for this."
Yeah. If I were a betting man, which I'm not, but if I were, I would say Danny's not coming back in Singapore. I think it'll be
Yeah,
the race after.
yeah, that's
I
a
think it's
good
just
bet.
too much to ask for somebody who's broken their hand after
Hmm.
such a short recovery period.
Yeah, to then proceed to drive the most difficult race of the year and potentially not even be in shape. Yeah, that would be a hard ask. Did you see that Oscar led his first race or first lap of the Grand Prix in his entire career? That was pretty fun.
I did see that. Yeah, good for him.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, we got to see a little bit of like Max and Hamilton fight. I mean, that wasn't really much of a fight, but
No, not at all. Lewis just pulled over and said, "On you go, bud.
hmm
Catch you
yeah, he's
later."
like, get out of here.
Yeah.
What were some of your biggest like pieces of information that you gleaned from this race, looking forward to the rest of the season?
Oh, well, you mentioned that Williams might not be strong later on, but we didn't expect them to go well in Zandvoort either. Neither did they. So I, I'm still thinking that Albon has some performances up his sleeve that he's going to be able to
All right,
pull
the
out of the
door's still
bag.
open.
Yeah.
All
Uh,
right, good point.
McLaren proved that they weren't great in top speed, very draggy, but hopefully these next upcoming circuits should suit them well. So
Hmm.
looking forward to a McLaren resurgence again.
Again, yeah. You know, of course, I'm a McLaren fan, so I have some bias in what I say, but it was interesting. I was not expecting them to be as competitive as they were today, and for them to be hanging with the Williams on a track that is like the best track for a Williams, for them to just be right there the entire time, I think is a good sign and omen for them. This is
Hmm.
probably their weakest track. And for them to do that well, I was like, oh, you know what? McLaren's not as weak as I thought they were. They're almost like a Walmart version of the Red Bull in that they're consistently enough where they're scoring points and they're hanging around on tracks where they shouldn't be hanging around. And it seems like most people have a hard time predicting McLaren and their results every weekend. So I hope that they, are able to dial in their car a little bit more and be a little bit more competitive. But I was pleasantly surprised by their result. So
Well,
don't know why.
look at us
Uh,
go. You and I are on the same page yet again.
I know.
And well, I think
Reminded.
that about wraps it up for us this week, guys. Thanks for joining in, and we look forward to talking about the upcoming Singapore Grand Prix.
Yeah.
And we'll catch you then.
Thanks for joining us. Peace out.
Thanks, guys.